Are you curious about Gestalt language processing? You are not alone. Join me, Corinne Smoose, and speech therapy PD for our podcast, The Gestalt Get Together. Our episodes try to balance the enthusiasm and excitement about GLP and its associated intervention ideas, as well as a healthy dose of skepticism about how to understand and integrate this paradigm shift into your career and the field at large. We hope that you can get together with us to learn more about Gestalts.
Welcome to SLP Learning Series, a podcast series presented by SpeechTherapyPD.com. The SLP Learning Series explores various topics of speech-language pathology. Each season dives deeper into a topic with a different host and guests who are leaders in the field. Some topics include stuttering, AAC, sports concussion, teletherapy, ethics, and more. Each episode has an accompanying audio course on SpeechTherapyPD.com and is available for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. Now, come along with us as we look closer into the many topics of speech-language pathology.
Hello, welcome to Making Sense of Selective Eating, the Role of the Dietitian, featuring Raquel Durban. My name is Maddie Metcalf, and I'm a speech-language pathologist with an interest and passion for pediatric feeding disorders. I'll be your host for the SpeechTherapyPD.com mini-series. Today's course is 1 hour and will be offered for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. If you're part of the ASHA registry and want your CEUs reported, you must have your ASHA number and address in your SpeechTherapyPD.com profile. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEU to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. Now, without further delay, I'd love to welcome Raquel Durban, MSRD LDN. Raquel is a registered dietitian specializing in the dietary management of families with food allergies. She received her MS degree in nutrition from the University of Maryland and completed a nutrition internship at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Raquel is a steering committee member of the International Network of Dietitians and Nutritionists in Allergy and serves on numerous medical advisory boards of nonprofit allergy-focused organizations. She also values her role in academia by contributing to continuing medical education programs and peer-reviewed publications. Raquel also participates in the American College and American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology, where she serves on the organization's numerous committees, collaborating with other healthcare professionals and patient advocacy groups to improve the quality of life and advance understanding for families living with food allergies. Every opportunity to counsel and educate is viewed with honor and empathy. Raquel will develop practical plans and education to meet the patients and clinicals where they are in their journey. There is not a one-size-fits-all answer for success, and success is not linear. She'll work to find the best balance of meeting nutritional needs with lifestyle demands and ensure collaboration with other members of the care team. Hi, Raquel. Thank you so much for coming on Making Sense of Selective Eating. How are you doing tonight?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I've only done one other podcast and it was so much fun. So I'm really excited to chat with you tonight. It's actually just started thunderstorming outside. So I saw my light flicker a little bit, but hopefully we'll be okay. How have you been?
I am doing really good. I've been looking forward to this episode all day long. I love these podcast recordings because they always fill my cup. I love educating. I love sharing the word of PFD, and I love interdisciplinary care. So this podcast is
All the same things I'm into. So there we go.
Well, I'm so thrilled to have you on because, full disclosure, one of the first times that I had a kiddo that I really thought we needed a dietitian on the team, which honestly we probably always need one, but it was just, we really needed somebody. And I was not educated enough and I referred them to a nutritionist. And then the nutritionist got there and she's like, what do you want me to do? I can't really help you. I mean, I can give you some things, but I can't see if you have any deficiencies or talk with you or anything like that. Like there was just such, I don't know, I feel like I really missed the mark. And this mom went to this appointment that I recommended and made the referral for, and she was like, why did you refer us there? And I was like, oh no. And so that was a huge learning point for me. Dietitian is who I needed to refer to.
Well, one of our kind of gripes in our nutrition world is that our governing body, the Commission of Dietetic Registration, now calls us dietitian/nutritionist, which I guess gives us ownership over the term nutritionist as well. But we fought so hard to be called dietitians. And then they were like, and slash, you're now going to be dietitian/nutritionist. And I mean, I guess it does give us some ownership over that legality and some of those terms. But unfortunately, there are a lot of health coaches or people who are practicing without a license or without appropriate information. And I actually applaud the person that said, hey, I can't help you. I don't know how to figure this out for you. Because unfortunately, I see a lot of patients who things were done that were not evidence-based. I'm all about like naturopathic approach, making sure it's a little crunchy if we need to, but it can be unfortunate when they're doing things that are not evidence-based, making your story a little bit more muddy to go back to.
That's such a good point. And that's really frustrating for your field because that is such a broad spectrum, having that slash in there. That would be really frustrating and just kind of muddying the waters for outside professionals that might not be quite as aware that that is a case, like I was whenever I made that first little O starting out.
Well, and just like SLPs, I mean, registered dietitians/nutritionists, we also have our own niches. Like I've had patients come to me with kidney disease and I'm like, I love that you were looking for help. I am not the right person for you, but they'll find you on their insurance. And I think just continuing to be honest and give yourself limitations that you feel are appropriate to best serve the patient is always, I'm sometimes too honest, like, sorry, I really can't help you.
I think that's a great point. That's something I always stress to my students, especially if I have a student that isn't like a graduate clinician student that isn't necessarily loving feeding, but they're wanting to dip their toe in. I always tell them, hey, this is within your scope, but if you don't feel competent and confident treating this, it's okay to refer out to somebody else in your community that does, because there's probably someone else that's in that niche. And so, I love just kind of hitting on that little, because it's I don't know, I think it's a big deal because I have kids that I definitely refer out, like stuttering. I don't even know. I'm going to refer out to the person that does stuttering in my community.
It's the same way for us as dietitians. And a lot of parents will also come to me and say, I feel exhausted from doing all of the things that are medical, and I really want to do something that's off the beaten path. While I appreciate that everyone has their own way of approaching it, all I can say is those are not evidence-based. We do not recommend them. They might give you incorrect information, and then they're going to do what makes them feel right. They oftentimes go and explore it and they come back and they say, hey, thanks for letting me try it. Heard you, noted, and now I'm back.
Well, with all of that talk, can we kind of jump in and go over what the role of the dietitian is on an interdisciplinary team when you're working with a child with a pediatric feeding disorder?
For sure. It can be the way that I summarize it, and then I'll kind of go back, is I tell you what to feed your kid, and they tell you how to feed your kid. Because I am only as good as the kid that will eat. And because I'm specialized in food allergies, and that's my primary, clinic, these kids have had a lot of trauma in their lives. So in FPIES, they're 6 months old and their first early experiences with food result in profuse, delayed vomiting that can be just terrifying for parents and then really upsetting to the babies. So the babies are like, why am I going to eat something off of this spoon again? Because last time it made me really, really sick.
Right.
Or they have multiple episodes to different foods, and now a green food and a white food and an orange food are all scary looking. And I don't know that there's as much respect or like cognitive awareness of the trauma that babies experience with feeding.
Yeah.
We say, oh, they were really little, they're not going to remember, but they do. And it really takes a village with my OT or SLP and my physician to create a plan that we feel confident with, and then ask the SLP or OT to implement it for us.
I love that you just really hit the nail on the head with like what that interdisciplinary care team, it's not one person making the decision.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
that group
No.
effort with everybody kind of supporting in their own way. And then another thing that just kind of resonated with me, or not really resonated, but just made a lot of sense, is that even though you're in that dietitian and you're kind of sitting in that nutritional domain of PFD. So if you didn't tune into the first episode with Stephanie Cohen, PFD has 4 domains: medical, nutritional, feeding skill, and psychosocial. So the dietitian, you know, sitting in that nutritional domain, SLPs are really in that feeding skill domain. But even you have to be mindful of like that psychosocial, and then the FPIs with the allergies. So there's just so much overlap that you have to kind of be aware.
Well, I think even just as the dietitian or just as the SLP, right? We tend to have more time with our patients than a physician.
Yeah.
So we are digging in, and we are able to say, I mean, I also do some work with Early Head Start, and we talk a lot about, let's look at your WIC package. Let's look at your SNAP benefits. Same thing in clinic. So 1, your kid is having a difficult time eating. 2, you have budget restraints, time constraints. I have one parent right now that works 3rd shift and the other parent works 1st shift, and they're trying to, and they're not together. So they're trying to divide and conquer, and they don't have any other help. And the child will not eat anything, but will drink anything. So it's looking at them from head to toe, and then all of the external factors. The grandparents who love to feed, please don't feed the baby the cookie that has peanut butter in it and they're peanut butter allergic. And that just adds to that trauma. So there's, I guess to your point, it's just very multifaceted. And I don't know that there's a wrong way to approach it, as long as you're just thinking about all of the different aspects that when that patient leaves the office.
So you mentioned FPIs. For people that might be unaware of what that is, can you kind of explain it a little?
Yes. So FPIs is called food, or it's actually, if you Google it, you might still see that it's asking if you're wondering about flies, but it says it's food protein induced enterocolitis syndrome. It is a diagnosis that exists in infants, children, adolescents, and adults. It's just becoming, in recent years, more talked about in adult and adolescent FPIs. Infancy is how we started kind of looking at this diagnosis. And rather than having an allergic response that we traditionally think of to peanut and hives, swelling, difficulty breathing, and using epinephrine to reverse the reaction, it's actually a delayed reaction that occurs 2 to 6 hours post-ingestion. And these children will vomit profusely, sometimes to the point of shock. Oftentimes you'll see lethargy and pallor. And the means of reversing the reaction rather than epinephrine is actually hydration. So it's not just like all the contents of their belly. It's actually this spacing, third spacing in the fluid shift, so that they kind of decompensate pretty quickly. And not every reaction is that severe, and some are so severe that you'll never unsee it or unhear it.
Well, do you grow out of FPIs, or does it follow you throughout life?
Interestingly, it's such a spectrum. You can grow out of it. Some patients will convert to anaphylaxis to that food. So let's say that you have, like when we started doing early introduction of solids and peanut became like, you must do it, you must do it. And there's definitely very specific patient populations for that. But we started seeing more FPIs to peanut. And then cow's milk has always been a really prominent FPIs food. But some of these patients will actually convert from FPIs to anaphylaxis. So we're always balancing the when do we reintroduce, because we're trying to not have FPIs, but also prevent anaphylaxis. Like, it's always a negotiation. But then sometimes it persists into adulthood, and sometimes it's onset in adulthood. Like they've eaten chicken forever and then they have a reaction.
Wow, that is so interesting. I was familiar with FPIs, but did not know all of that information.
It sounds weird, but it's like my favorite diagnoses to work with
Mhm.
because you really get to form just a sweet bond with the families. And it's really focused on their cultural needs, financial access, feeding preferences, like we all know purees, baby-led weaning, organic, not organic, jarred foods, homemade foods. So it really gives you the opportunity to meet that infant most of the time in the beginning of like laying a happy microbiome and feeding diversity with colors, textures, temperatures.
That is so neat. Getting to kind of be on that like ground level with them.
Yeah.
And kind of help like educate, support, and, you know, make that healthy gut biome and like well-rounded diet early on. So this is not one of our questions that we prepared. Sorry, we kind of went down a
That's
little
fine.
side trail, but how young can you test for food allergies? Because I've gotten some mixed feedback from local allergens in my area.
Yes, I
For
think that
allergies.
there's a lot of, so allergists have different preferences, right?
Mhm.
But the data shows us we can test as young as 4 months. But there's always the child is the gold standard. So
Mhm.
if the kid has a reaction, the kid has a reaction. If the test is negative and the kid has a reaction, we got to figure out what's going on. So there's skin prick testing, but then there's also blood testing to serum IgE. And sometimes allergists will do both,
Mhm.
or one or the other, like for confirmation.
Okay. Okay, that is good to know, just to have that in my back pocket. And then
So
real
yeah,
quick,
4 months. Yeah.
and then just real quick, and then we'll jump into selective eating and nutrition around that. But what are some early signs of that maybe you should refer for allergy testing?
Oh my gosh. I think there's so many that we kind
Mhm.
of overlook because we don't we think of allergy as being so traditional, like anaphylaxis. But there are other diagnoses of food allergy that are IgE mediated. So there's still a food allergy, but the little IgE, globulin E, doesn't get angry in them. It's other mechanisms of action, like T cells calling in eosinophils and saying, hey, I'm being attacked, come help me out. Or in FPIs, it's a different cellular mechanism. So you have those kids and we're like, they're just really a picky eater. They're such a picky eater. That to me is like, we need to do a GI evaluation. Like if you're not able to make an intervention with SLPOT, that's lightning. I'm so sorry.
I saw that a little bit in the background.
I was like, I'm going to plug in my computer just in case. But there are other signs, growth faltering, like consistent diarrhea. I think that there are ways to, when in doubt, assess. Because any allergist that's really savvy in these kinds of diagnoses is going to do appropriate testing. If you come in and you're like, my kid's having diarrhea every time that they eat cow's milk. Well, is that lactose intolerance? And so we ask more questions, or should we be skin testing? So the allergists do a really good job of teasing that out. But then there's also things like, my kid doesn't want to eat. My kid only eats smooth foods. Maybe they're having some symptoms of eosinophilic esophagitis.
I've heard this before, and I'm not entirely sure if it's true. Is it true that we crave what we're allergic to or insensitive to if it's like at the like intolerance level versus full-blown allergen level?
Oh, this is my favorite question, and I'm a little soapboxy about it. So,
Soapbox away, Raquel.
okay, well, I just want to be really clear on food allergy versus food intolerance. And I'll answer your question in a very long-winded way. But okay, so food allergy involves the immune system. That's where we have FPIs, EOE, allergic procticulitis, which is like the bloody mucousy stools in babies. Those fall under the non-IgE umbrella. And then there's the IgE allergens that fall under anaphylaxis. So the food allergy umbrella encompasses all of that. But then there's the food intolerances. And those are actually don't involve the immune system. So a food intolerance would be like lactose intolerance, or if you're missing like the maltase enzyme. And then celiac disease is an autoimmune condition. So definitely a huge separation between food allergy and intolerance, but then you use another word called sensitization. And there's a lot of hope for patients seeking a better understanding of what's causing their symptoms through these food sensitivity tests. There's lots of commercials for them. They're sold at a lot of non-MD-DO kinds of practices. And they are actually really interesting because if you swabbed me right now, what would show up is that I've been eating a lot of chicken and lettuce, bell peppers, onions, and wheat might be like the reds for me. But they're red because they're the foods that I eat that I've been sensitized to, not the foods that I'm sensitive to.
So like they're the foods that are most like prominent in your system?
Yeah, so what they're measuring is something called IgG, immunoglobulin G. So if you think about IgE and how if it gets going, it's not a good thing. So when your IgG test says that you have really high levels to peanut because you love a peanut butter and jelly sandwich every day, what that really means is it's kind of protecting the IgE from going haywire.
Okay.
So it tells you what you've been sensitized to, meaning like once I ate a tomato, I've had tuna before. It just really, it's actually a really good food history. Like if a patient brings me an IgG panel, I'm like, this is perfect. It tells me all the foods that you eat, but it does not tell anything about sensitivity.
Do those get mismarketed as showing what you're sensitive to or interpreted that way sometimes?
1 bazillion %.
Okay. Gotcha.
That's also why they're not covered by insurance. Because they're not evidence-based. It's like the kinesiology where you put the food in a tube in your hand and then you hold your hand out to the side. And if your hand drops, then you're allergic to that food.
Oh, I had not heard of that before. That's an interesting way to test.
So in the food allergy guidelines, there's an entire list of non-approved testing methods. People will still seek out the IgG testing. And I tell them, thank you for being interested in your health. Unfortunately, these tests are not evidence-based, and what this is just a really good recall of the foods that you eat.
Okay. So is it true that we crave the foods that okay. So in this question, so there are intolerances. That's like lactose intolerance.
It's a real thing.
Okay.
It's just not a food allergy.
Gotcha. So is it true that we crave the foods that we are, I guess, intolerant to? Because if you're allergic, you're not going to eat peanuts if it gives you anaphylactic.
Well, most people who are food allergic avoid the food because their body is so like hypersensitive to the smell or the taste or whatever it is, because it's like a self-protection mechanism. But food intolerant patients, they go a little rogue because they have more flexibility.
Right.
This is not a life-threatening diagnosis. This is not going to cause difficulty breathing or choking episodes or profuse vomiting that requires IV hydration and going to the ER. So I don't know that there's any evidence to support that you crave those foods more. I don't think that there is any evidence, but I can certainly see why people would be more flexible and like even more like, oh, it's just a piece of cheese and maybe I'll have some gas later.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So whenever I have a new kiddo that's been referred to me because their parents are super worried that they are picky, parents' primary concerns 80% of the time are that they're going to have nutritional deficiencies. And I learned about you at Feeding Matters, and your presentation I thought was so interesting because you provided a breakdown of like, okay, so here is like a Pop-Tart, and these are all the nutrients that you get out of this Pop-Tart. And it was really eye-opening to me how many nutrients you actually can get from some of those like preferred foods that these kiddos are eating. The other thing that shocked me was how they can be getting like too much of these nutrients by eating some of these foods. And so how do you kind of handle that whenever you're counseling a parent and they're like, I want them to eat more fruits because they don't eat any fruits and vegetables and they're going to be like nutrient deficiency or in nutrient deficiency?
Yeah. So I always take a pretty decent diet recall. Some people are very ashamed of what their kids eat or what they eat themselves. And I'm like, this is a safe space. I don't care what you eat. I just need to know so I can help you. That's I guess the first step. And then looking at telling them like, hey, did you know that this cereal is actually enriched with blah, blah, blah. And giving them that safe kind of, I guess like a little safe pocket that their kid is getting some nutrition. It's just not optimized. And that we can fix any of these things, but that doesn't mean that your kid has to eat fruits or vegetables because your kid hasn't done that for 3 years. So saying, Johnny, I need you to eat more vegetables is not the solution. The solution might be that we need a little extra vitamin C, and it's only short term because we're working with a feeding therapist who's helping us explore green colors and different textures of green colors. Generally, there's a lot of complexity and the child is far less likely to eat it just because the parents are so dead set on them eating fruits and vegetables. But just today, I had a really, really selective eater. And I said, it's okay. Like, this is where you are. Let's meet you where you are. She was 7. Right now, it's really hard for you. You say that you want to eat the hamburger, but you can't eat the hamburger. Like, you can't figure out how to actually get it in your mouth. She was just afraid. No problem. So let's look at what's missing and then fill in the blank with a vitamin or a food that she might eat that might have that source in it.
How important is it that we have a really, from like a nutritional standpoint, how important is it that we have a really robust diet full of lots of variety and lots of fruits and vegetables?
I'm going to sound like a total nerd because I keep talking about papers and journal art, whatever, but I am a nerd.
Research.
So there just came out 2 papers on prevention, and there was, looking at the diet diversity of a pregnant woman and also looking at how we're introducing foods to infants, not even from like a highly allergenic standpoint, but just in general, like diet diversity. And we've been saying for years, like there's a lot of information like in the Dutch population on diet diversity and how it affects the microbiome and other cohorts of patients. But in America, we have like the least diverse diet because everything is so processed and baby foods are so sterile. So there's no like dirt in the carrots. There's no like extra microbiome diversity. So it makes their microbiome literally like just full of circles and maybe like 5 circles. But I want their guts to be circles and squares and triangles and rhombuses and all the different shapes, right? And I want them to have lots of those. But you can't get that in a low diversity diet.
Okay.
Also, with the processing of foods, we're fighting a lot of inflammation, which makes that harder too. So data again, but there's data to show that some of these lecithins that are in our foods are highly inflammatory. So the emulsifiers can be highly inflammatory. The definition for an ultra processed food, which is like a Pop-Tart, is actually a chemically engineered product with 5 or more ingredients that are not like butter, sugar, wheat. And so they don't even call it a food. It's a product.
That is so interesting.
Which really impacts your microbiome, right? Because you're not even eating real food, you're eating some concoction of chemicals. They say chemicals in the definition. And when I read that, I was like, ew. Like,
yeah.
When you think about it in that way, you just like want to have a whole garden. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just plug this in. I'm so sorry, but you can keep talking.
Absolutely. So kind of knowing that from the research that you've like read, knowing what you know about like gut health and having a diverse microbiome, how do you kind of counsel a parent through that if their child has like avoidant restrictive food intake disorder and like that is just so far off?
And that's where you meet them where they're at. And I say, these are the foods that we're eating. That was how it worked today. So these are the foods that you're eating. we need to get a therapist, a feeding therapist, we need to get our team, and then we can start to use food to fill this in. In this moment, this is what we're getting from Pop-Tarts and ramen, etc. And making suggestions where I can. Like if the sodium is excessive, I'll say, hey, could we use half of the seasoning pouch and maybe some salt-free chicken broth?
Mm.
And then finding, like, are you comfortable with using a vitamin? How comfortable do you feel? Like, what brands resonate with you? Do you have a preference? There are lots of liquid supplements, but finding one that doesn't contain exactly what we're trying to avoid can be really hard.
I was about to ask how nutritional supplement like shakes and drinks kind of fit in with that, kind of supporting like the microbiome and like that sort of thing.
So I have the luxury of living in a food allergy world. So I don't use a lot of the cow's milk based products. I use a lot of amino acid based formula, which is no intact food proteins, just the amino acids, and then a lot of extensively hydrolyzed products. We had a formula crisis a while ago.
Yeah.
And a lot of patients were bringing in formula from different countries in Europe. And in their countries, hypoallergenic does not mean what our country means for hypoallergenic. So we had a lot of adverse reactions from that. So providing education on the different formulas. Yeah, it was really, really sad.
That's hard.
Very hard.
Like it takes a long time to get formula. I had a mom one time on my caseload who was ordering formula from like Germany or something, and it took so long to get it in. So I can't imagine if you like were really banking on getting that and then it didn't work while we were in the middle of a formula shortage. That would have been.
I mean, I think that there's some, and I'm sometimes I'm not in agreement, sometimes I am, but there's this thought that Europe has like better standards of food guidelines. But their infant formula is not made the same way ours is made because they are basing it on different nutrient needs in their population because of what they eat. So also the level of hydrolyzation was just really traumatic, and having those kids drink something that wasn't safe. But I tell patients what the ingredients are. I have a whole wall of samples. We talk through all the ingredients. If they have questions about an ingredient, I tell them what that ingredient is. And there are some products that in my nature, whoa, did you hear that?
No, I did not.
Huge thunder. Whew,
oh my
sorry.
gosh.
But it is okay. It makes us more cozy. It's all right. So I just try to inform them of what's in the products. And again, in my own nature, I offer them lots of choices with guidance as to why I prefer X over Y.
So whenever you're working with a family, is your end goal always really diverse diet and like expansion when you're working with a patient?
Not always, actually, which sounds like that should be my goal. But a lot of times my goal is teaching them how to cook so that they can, because we're so dependent on like our parents or whoever's caring for us to cook for us. And if I can teach a teenager like how to cook, then that might lead them to having more diverse choices.
That's a really great point. And I love that too, because you're also teaching them like independence and autonomy, which
Yeah,
like
a life skill.
Yeah. And not only that, like following with like responsive feeding frameworks, one of the like core values of that is autonomy, because like having autonomy, relationship, and there's another one that I'm blanking on, kind of helps to facilitate intrinsic motivation to like want to eat those foods.
Yeah.
And so if that kid has that skill, like, oh, I could make whatever I want, and they get a little curious about something, that's going to just open up that opportunity for them to, have the means to try it. So I think that's really cool that you are able to do that. Do you have like a little kitchen area in your treatment spot where you guys like practice cooking together?
A lot of during COVID, a lot of lessons in my own house.
Yeah.
And now what we do is I have like YouTube videos that we pull up, and I'm like, let's go home and try this. The next video that we have might be like a virtual console. And then they show me kind of when they're at home, like what they're doing. And then in early Head Start, we're trying to get a program started where we have culinary professionals come in and teach the parents so that they can
Oh my
learn how
gosh.
to cook, which is, I think it'll be really exciting. I'm hoping that the first one will be in October for us. But you can, they should go to the store with their parents and they should explore the aisles and see what interests them. Because
Mhm.
parents say, oh, it's so hard to shop with my kid. And I'm like, it sounds like it's a lot harder to eat with your kid. So take your kid food shopping.
Mm, I love that. Like, just, take them, like, it's going to be maybe a little bit more challenging. It's going to take a little bit longer, but who knows what they might see and get
Yeah.
interested in whenever they're there in that environment. So, yeah.
I remember when
Um,
my kids saw a star fruit and they were like, what is this thing? Why have
mhm.
you not bought this for us? And I was like, I don't know. I used to eat as a kid, like whatever, we can buy it. Right. But like, I wasn't thinking about star
Yeah.
fruit. I'm like, here's apples, bananas, like the basic
Hmm.
thing.
And then they kind of initiated that new food exploration on their own because they had that opportunity
Yeah.
to have like a really low pressure exposure to kind of ignite that curiosity within them. So, what is global compassionate care mean to you?
I know we talked about this a little bit right before we joined the group, but
Mhm.
so compassionate care, we always want to be compassionate healthcare providers, meaning putting ourselves in the shoes, the life of this patient and really thinking through. And if we can't relate, just showing compassion and empathy for the child, the parents, the caregivers, but globally offering compassionate care to me. And like when I think of compassionate care, like a lot of people think of like compassionate use of like different drugs that are like in rare diseases or for other reasons outside of their FDA indication. But global compassionate care is the whole body. So I'm here to treat your nutrition, but your nutrition affects how you think and how you feel and your fatigue and your energy level. It affects your heart, it affects your muscles, it affects your skin, especially in like 95% of my eczema babies.
Mm,
So looking at the whole patient from internally, but then externally, where you're saying, where do you food shop? How many times a week or a month do you food shop? What is your budget when you go? Do you go to one store, two stores? Do you have a car to get there? And you live on the third floor. Oh, how do you get your groceries upstairs? And they'll say, we just buy really small amounts when we go to make sure we can get them upstairs. Who else is caring for your baby? Oh, it's just me. And I'm a single dad. I mean, really looking at them completely globally as a whole person and who's kind of like if they're the center of the world, and then we're looking at all of the little planets around
mm.
them. All of that impacts our success and our outcomes.
Can you explain a little bit more how that might like impact your ability to better treat a child having all those factors?
Yes. I'm sure my clinicians look at my notes and go, why did you ask all these questions? And I'm like, but so for example, I have a patient with EOE and he's really little, he's a toddler, and he's with his dad all day. And then, like right before bedtime, he goes to his mom's house and just sleeps there. And then dad gets him in the morning when he wakes up. So my question is, well, when is he getting his medication? Like who's giving it to him? Because I only interface with dad. So if dad isn't giving it to him, which I found out, and mom was giving it to him, but I've only interfaced with her once, that's important to know that we're in different households
Mm,
and who's got what role and responsibility. Or if the kid goes to daycare and they're in a half day program, and then you're like, okay, well, that's, they're only going to be doing breakfast and a snack. So when the kid comes home and they're starving, I need to get ready for lunch and I need something that's easy for the parent to be able to prep
mm,
so that they're not coming into a screaming kid and then making something for lunch.
right.
Grandparents, like what's the deal with the grandparents? Do they live close? Because they're going to be at the house all the time. Are they
Mhm.
respectful of the allergies? Are they feeling like, maybe you're being too hard on them with asking them to try something or smell something? like trying to get the perspective of how all of these external people make the parents feel or the kid feel.
Mm-hmm. How do you offer any like guidance, suggestions, or counseling whenever you're kind of speaking into those kind of uncomfortable, very personal family culture kind of relationships?
For
Like,
sure. I feel like I have to, because if they're telling me, cool plan, Raquel, can't do that,
mm-hmm,
then I need to understand, like, what is your barrier?
mm,
And so I've had patients where I help them identify food pantries, or patients where I'm like, did you know that you qualify for SNAP? And then we look online and we work that out, or looking for housing. Oh, you don't have stable housing, so you don't have a microwave, or like, let me help you with that. So
mm.
they're very uncomfortable questions. We don't have a social worker. It would be fabulous if we had a social worker, but I still am not very good at my job if I don't understand what's going to happen when they leave my door.
Mm. That is such a good point, and I definitely think I need to incorporate that into my practice a little bit more because it's really easy to make these. I ask about like what does your mealtime environment look like and how are things going, but I haven't quite gotten into some of those more uncomfortable personal questions, but they really do play such a role. And, are they, I mean, thinking back to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that very foundation
Yeah.
is, do you have a roof over your head? Are you safe? Are you fed? And are you able to get
Yeah.
your basic needs met? And if they are not able to do that, the parents are also going to be in survival mode on top of having a kiddo with eating difficulties. And so how do they manage that whenever they're wondering where they're going to sleep that night or if they're even going to be able to get groceries for their kid? So that's, I don't know, such a really great way to do it. And then doing it in that non-judgmental way, holding a lot of compassion, empathy for that family.
And then I
Also,
always ask them, like, I'm interested in asking you some hard and personal questions. If any of these don't feel like you want to answer them, you certainly don't have to. I just
mhm,
I just want you to be successful and feel proud of yourself and proud of the work that you're putting in, because I know you're working really hard
mhm.
and I want your efforts to be noticed and effective.
Yeah. Oh man, that's just so good to kind of keep in the back of your mind when working with families, especially around food, where they have to spend money and such. Can you talk a little bit more about the microbiome and how that influences the whole body?
Oh, yes. I
Whole other can of worms.
Well, that's kind of another can of worms. But we we know that it makes, if your microbiome is not happy, that it makes you more susceptible to, illness. And I think the biggest issue that babies have is it can make you more susceptible to food allergies. And I loathe the word leaky gut. Like, I just find that word to be, that's like on my list of I don't like. But what's really happening is there's all this inflammation. And so it's making the spaces in between more less, like, because they're inflamed. Normally they fit together like little building blocks, but they're more inflamed. And so they're not quite as tight to be able to hold in the inflammatory responses. And there's a lot to be said for diet diversity. Like, I don't think we can stress that enough as dietitians. It's like the kids who live on 5 boxes of X supplement per day. And I'm like, I'm so glad that you are thriving growth chart wise on that. But I'm terribly worried for your gut microbiome.
Mm,
And then you can do a probiotic, but the question is, what are you doing for the probiotic that you're taking? So the gut microbiome is really critical, but sometimes you're at critical mass for other things. Can you afford a probiotic?
mhm,
Which one should we use? Like, what strain are we using for what you're dealing with? Is it really necessary? Like, what's the density of the different strains that are in that? And then there's always well, I thought I needed a refrigerated probiotic. I'm like, I don't care. Like, it's more about getting the right strains into you and the right amounts and then you feeding it correctly.
Mhm.
Because taking a probiotic and then your diet just continuing to not be diverse and nutrient dense and fiber rich, it's like a drop of water in a lake, like not very helpful in filling up that lake with what it needs. It's already there.
Right. So another kind of dumb question potentially. So a probiotic is going to help increase your microbiome if you feed it appropriately, because it's going to increase the different bacteria that's in your gut. But that doesn't necessarily have to do as much with like a vitamin or a nutritional supplement. That's going to be more the vitamins and nutrients that your body needs. And so they're kind of two different.
Well, this
working on
isn't a
different
dumb
things.
question. There's no dumb questions. People ask all sorts of stuff, and I often don't know the answer. And then it's like, well, I think we're all just doing the best we can with what we got. So
Very true.
don't sell yourself short. But I think on the flip side with vitamins,
Mhm.
if you're inflamed and you can have a lot of challenges with absorbing the nutrients, right? So when you're talking about taking a vitamin, my question is always, can I pull labs to see where you are? Because if I give you XYZ as my recommendation, how much of a dent am I really making in where you are? And then, but yes, a probiotic is microbiome healthy, and then a vitamin is intention to be supporting bones and vitamin C for immune system, and that's the intention behind it. But neither of them is really effective if you're not nourishing it with like some fiber in the diet,
Mhm.
a little diversity.
So whenever you're working with a kiddo who's a selective eater and they have a pretty limited diet, even though you have all these like big picture whole health kind of goals for them, it's okay to just still kind of meet them where they're at in that moment and kind of work with where they're kind of currently comfortable with, while the
For
SLP
sure.
or the OT are kind of working to expand into those other
Yeah.
areas.
Today I told the little girl, I said, I know this is really hard for you, and we're going to help to connect you with like an RFID therapist who will help you to understand what you're feeling and what you're
Yeah.
thinking. And it's okay to not know. That's why there's special people like healthcare professionals that can help you.
Mhm.
And in the meantime, we're going to take the foods that you do eat and we're going to prepare them maybe grilled or steamed or roasted. And we created like a non-food based treasure chest.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's your only goal. And maybe like once a week you sniff a new food or you touch a new food. But real chill. This is where we are right now. Don't
Yeah.
want to heighten the anxiety, but why don't we just explore different textures of the currently accepted foods?
When you're working with a selective eater, are there any like top nutritional deficiencies that you're like primarily concerned about, or does it vary based on the patient and like a little bit more individualized than like I'm concerned about X, Y, and Z?
I think in general, I'm always worried about zinc. And the first thing that we see instead of weight loss is we see growth stunting, height stunting. So zinc, calcium, because either the kid's drinking 5 milk-based shakes a day or they're completely avoiding milk and cheese and yogurt because of how it makes them feel. So vitamin D, calcium, and then B vitamins. And zinc, iron, and B vitamins probably would be the ones that I find the most challenging.
And so if I am able to connect with a really awesome dietitian in my area and we're like collaborating together, could I use the dietitian to identify the nutritional deficiencies that are there. And then they could use me to say, okay, we have X, Y, and Z that we need to work on iron. And they're currently eating these foods. And so if we can maybe find a way to change to this food where there would be a little bit more iron. Is that kind of what that
For sure.
partnership looks like in your practice?
Yes. And like people are like, oh, well, iron, then we're going to do like bread. No, this kid is not going to eat bread or toast or a roll or a cracker. I'm going to use a white fluffy potato.
Mm.
Like that's still a source of iron. The kid eats French fries. Can we draw a tangent line between the French fries and the potato?
Mm.
Like this bread isn't going to happen because the bolus that it forms is so much different than a potato bolus. Like
Right.
it's gloopy.
Mm-hmm.
Takes a lot of dexterity to like get that ball of bread down.
Yeah.
But you can use instant mashed potatoes and rehydrate them and have like a really soggy French fry kind of feeling, right?
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a dream, honestly, to have like a really strong dietitian. Do you have any recommendations for like kind of reaching out in this? Because like I referred kids to dietitians in my area, but I haven't quite gotten that interdisciplinary teamwork kind of collaboration. Do you have any recommendations on how to kind of open that door whenever you like make the initial referral, maybe have a follow-up call with them? They're like, yep, just keep tube feeding. No, they were fine. And that's kind of gets shut down.
I mean, I think going to networking like events is really helpful. I'm not extroverted, but that there I will be extroverted because it involves patient care. So going to networking events or even going to like a pharmaceutical dinner if your practice allows that. But it's a great way to meet other clinicians or they can connect you with another clinician. And then sometimes just like cold calling the practices and saying like you can call PGI and say, hey, do you have a dietitian who works in feeding disorders? Do you have, I mean, sometimes it was just calling around. Do you take insurance? Have you ever seen a kid who doesn't eat?
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we just work on speech. And I'm like, all right, next. Or, you know, the dietitian just focuses on renal disease or whatever.
Right.
So just calling.
To get somebody that's amazing like you are, what are some kind of things to like, if I'm looking for a dietitian in my area that's going to be kind of a pediatric feeding disorder, kind of support that nutritional domain, think about allergies and that sort of thing. What are some things to like, are there any like buzzwords in your field that would be like, okay, yeah, here they are. This is this person.
I would just ask them like, what do you know about like what's your interaction with kids? Like, do you see kids and then what does that interaction look like? You know, a lot of us are seeing kids in the hospital.
Yeah.
Are you in a hospital?
I'm not, but the dietitians that I primarily work with are in the hospital. So I also wonder if they're maybe just like a little busy.
Sometimes, but sometimes you have to be seen in that specialty clinic to be able to see that dietitian. That's often the case. I don't think they're blowing you off. It's just
Gotcha.
Usually, like in my clinic, you don't have to be referred that way because we're a private practice.
Sure.
But I guess the buzzwords would be first question, do you work with kids? And then when thinking about kids who have feeding aversions, like just get a sense of how they talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I think you can feel how someone does their job just by asking them like what comes to mind when I say this and like what would that look like for us working together in support? And I've worked really hard to be the dietitian that I am today, but I've had great mentors too. And so even finding maybe another SLP or OT who is more seasoned, just literally older than you, and has maybe had connections as well that could support you in even starting a conversation.
Well, I'm gonna call all of my favorite feeding SLPs. It's the first thing tomorrow. Be like, hey, who are you using? Do you have any recommendations for this?
Yeah, and call other practices. Like, you're allowed to. I mean, I think that's what I do. I call another practice and say, hey, what do you do? And who do you send to?
Yeah, I also haven't quite looked outside of my local hospital for like if there's any dietitians and private practices in my area. So I think I might kind
Yeah.
of start there too, just to see if there are more options in our local hospital to kind of get that support. And I also might look into seeing a dietitian for myself. You have me thinking about a lot of things after our conversation today.
Does your state require, I'm sure your state requires state licensure for
Mhm.
dietitians.
They do.
So you can also reach out to like the Commission on Dietetic Registration, and you can
Okay.
say like, I'm trying to figure out who the dietitians are in my area. Like, can you help me with that?
That is a great place to kind of start. Is the commission, I just Googled it. Is it national?
Yes.
I'll put
But you
in the,
also probably have a local or even regional dietetic association. So you could
okay.
Google like your city and then like dietitian association or registered dietitians.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Everything you said tonight just all makes so much sense. And I don't know, I would say that's one of the trickiest parts that I kind of get in sometimes is knowing that the parents are concerned about nutrition, knowing that it would benefit the child. I After having this conversation, I am understanding a little bit more about how like diet diversity impacts the gut microbiome and, our just full body health. It has me thinking about some of my kiddos a little bit differently than what I was previously. Just because like one, I'm very proud of the progress that my little kiddos have made, but just kind of taking that step back and looking at that big picture a little bit too. And I think that having that nutritionist or that dietitian slash nutritionist maybe on board would be so beneficial because, I think hearing about like where the deficiency are, where maybe we're over nutrient in would be so beneficial in being like, okay, well, I've been working on X, Y, and Z, but actually that's just going to make our nutrition a little bit worse or even more off balance versus if we were to go a different direction that's, equally feasible. It's just not where I was heading on my own, looking at the food chaining form on my own. And so kind of having that, I don't know, I just think that would be so cool to have that perspective a little
Well,
bit
that's
more
like a very nice
consistently.
compliment when you can kind of help to shape the way that people think about things
Hmm.
because we don't know what we don't know, right? And for
Yeah.
someone to leave with your thoughts and think, well, maybe I could explore this, or maybe I could make that relationship. I mean, it
Hmm.
does make my life a lot easier when there's a SLP or OT involved. But there are many notes that I write that say continue one up to one Pop Tart per day, or whatever the kid's jam is.
Right.
And it's just to validate I see you and I hear
Hmm.
you and I support where we're at. So give me, see where can we be flexible?
Right. Are Have there ever been any misconceptions about like a dietitian's role that's kind of that somebody's like come to you and it's kind of like, oh, that's not quite right.
Oh yeah, for sure. They, I get a lot of people who think I'm going to meal plan for them and give them like weeks worth of meal plans. The last time I meal planned was probably like 2011. And you make a whole meal plan based on what somebody wants to eat. And then they say, I don't like it. And then I'm like, no, these were outside of billable hours. I'm sure now in 2024, I can figure out how to bill for it, but I just don't want to do it. I
Yeah.
want to teach you how to eat intuitively. I want to teach you to eat with flexibility. I don't want you to feel married to a meal plan. I want you to go out with your friends or your spouse and have a dinner that wasn't on the meal plan.
Yeah.
I want you to eat fresh and seasonally and local. So if I told you to, buy lima beans, like that's not lima bean season or whatever it is.
Right.
So I think that's a huge misconception, at least for me.
Hmm.
And then that dietitians only do weight. We only worry about weight. I'm like, no, your kid's like hasn't grown in 6 months.
Right. Yeah. It's a little bit more than just like that weight there in that point.
Yeah. Or did you notice that your kid only eats white foods? And then they're like, oh my gosh, yeah.
Mm. Um, if you're working with a family that maybe doesn't have access to, it's the middle of the winter, or they don't have access to like be able to go to the farmer's market to buy fresh, or they can't afford fresh produce because it expires too quickly. Is there any
Frozen all
frozen?
day
Okay.
for sure. Canned, I think is great to have on hand, like in a real
Mm-hmm.
pickle. And some people's freezer space is petite. So I'm not knocking on the canned food. Just rinse it always really well to remove the extra salt off of it.
Okay.
But frozen, like we always have a big bag of frozen berries in our freezer because I'm not going to the farmer's market every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's middle of winter. I'm not going to be able to go pick some berries from our local farm. So, yeah, and especially with cost of things, I think frozen's great. It can be store brand frozen. I don't even care if it's a brand name.
Mm,
It could be a store brand can of beans. Great, rinse it, keep it moving.
yeah. I was so shocked. So we usually keep frozen berries on hand for smoothies and sometimes making jellies. But I poured too many frozen blueberries the other day and they thawed out and I ate them. And oh my gosh, they were so good. They were a little bit soggier. You didn't have the nice, like refreshing little pop, but it was so sweet and juicy and it still had so much flavor. And it really kind of shocked me. I was like, oh man, I might have to eat some of these frozen berries more often, more than just
Sometimes,
smoothies.
yeah, I just toss them in like my yogurt before I leave for work. And
Hmm.
then they still like they haven't gotten like mushy yet because they're kept in the refrigerator. And it's like, oh, it's kind of refreshing.
Yeah. I recently explored that. So if you haven't explored frozen fruits, highly recommend. They
Yeah.
are pretty delicious.
And
Uh,
even like the frozen vegetables that you buy, you can saute them, you can steam them, you could
mhm.
roast them. It's not like you don't have to put them in the microwave.
Yeah. My husband loves using frozen vegetables and sauteing them, and then it tastes just as good as if they were
Yeah.
fresh and they get a little bit crisp sometimes. So
We
yeah.
both have lots of like idealized outcomes,
Hmm.
but the best outcome is the one that serves the patient.
Mm. I love that because it's really hard sometimes to get idealistic because I don't know, it's hard not to go that route sometimes, but yeah, we just always have to, take into consideration like where that family is, what they have access to, what their life looks like in that like kind of global perspective and meet them where they are with things that they're going to be able to achieve. Because that's what we want them for them in all of our sessions. So we want to create a plan that they're able to achieve and feel successful at.
And maybe like walk in their shoes. Like I don't know if anybody's ever been to a food pantry, but it's interesting to see what's available at the food pantries.
Mm,
It's interesting to, like in your case, maybe like try the different spoons or the different nipples or the different cups or
yeah.
like in our clinic, I've tried all the different formulas and I hate going food shopping because it's very tedious with food allergies, like thinking about all the different, and I'm like, if I
Yeah.
hate it so much, these parents must be losing their mind. But
Especially
I
whenever
would,
it's a new shift
yeah,
that they're having to make.
I would just encourage any healthcare provider to just take a moment and try something that the patient might have to be doing.
Mm. Raquel, thank you so much. You just had so many great little nuggets of wisdom. You have me kind of thinking about things differently. Really excited to go find a nutritionist to pull onto my PFD team in my area. And I just really love your like very holistic approach that you take to your families, how you put yourself in their shoes and just are really compassionate, empathetic towards them and like where they are. And so I just really appreciate you sharing your perspective and some of your treatment approaches, as well as educating on the role of the dietitian on the feeding team, because I feel so much more confident knowing about allergies and what a dietitian does and all the things we talked about tonight. So
Well, thank you for letting me share just really like a day in the life of my job.
yeah, I'm so excited. I really love that this podcast series is so interdisciplinary and that we have all these different perspectives because each episode has a little bit of a different twist to it. And all of that is so important. There's such a big push right now for interprofessional education because that helps us is specifically related to PFD, kind of understand those other domains so that we can do our management piece a little bit better. And then also, I'm going to feel so much more confident talking to a dietitian now after learning from one. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time on another speechtherapypd.com live course. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's course. To complete the course, you must log into your account and complete the quiz and the survey. If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete mailing address in your account profile prior to course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to reflect on your ASHA transcript. Please note that if this information is missing, we cannot submit to ASHA on your behalf. Thanks again for joining us. We hope to see you next time. Each episode comes with an accompanying audio course on speechtherapypd.com, available for a 0.1 ASHA CEU. And just for our listeners, get $20 off any subscription with promo code SLPLearn20. Speechtherapypd.com is run by SLPs for SLPs. They've got the largest library of ASHA CE eligible courses out there, and they're adding fresh content every week. Remember, use the code SLPLearn20 to get $20 off access to over 1,000 courses for an entire year. Head over to speechtherapypd.com for more information and start earning CEs today. Thanks for tuning in to the SLP Learning Series. And don't forget, speechtherapypd.com is your go-to for all things ASHA CEUs. Your positive reviews and support mean the world to us, and we'd love for you to drop us a quick review and hit that subscribe button.